Until they bring the streetcars back. Chapter 34. They hauled me into the workhouse only a couple of miles out Lexington from Central. The sad-looking brick building crouched in the middle of the huge lawn, and I remembered the times I passed it and pitied the poor guys inside. The days took forever, living with winos, con artists, and petty criminals, and the old guys kept asking, "What's a kid like you doing in here?" I thought I'd be breaking huge rocks with a sledgehammer all day. They called it the workhouse, but most of the time I spent twiddling my thumbs in a cell. Although for a part of each day I did have to mop floors and clean latrines. Geez, you should have seen the toilets. I thought I was in an institution for the blind. The smells and filth turned my stomach. But I did the kind of job my dad would be proud of, and I swallowed my anger with the crummy food. I tried to sleep as much as possible and do my time in that outhouse, but sometimes at night I cried into my mattress and I wanted to tell someone that they had the wrong guy. There was a friendly old Palooka, who kind of took me under his wing, like what I needed was an advice from a bum in a workhouse. Spence had the eyes of a sawed-off shotgun, and he smoked cigarettes down so far his fingers were yellowed and scorched, and his face was so wrinkled and leathery it reminded me of an old catcher's mitt. He talked quietly for hours, and a lot of it was gibberish, but I couldn't help liking the guy, and I told him about Lola and my dad and a little about Gretchen. Homo sapiens is a mammal species that needs physical skin to skin touching and affection to survive, old Spence told me one gray afternoon. Caressing and kissing and effing are not frivolous pleasures, the fancy frosting of life, but necessities like air, water, and food. It has been demonstrated. He coughed like he choked to death, wiping phlegm on his sleeve, and he caught his breath. It had been demonstrated that infants of the species who aren't loved in this manner die. Spence paused and squinted out of his crimped face. Same goes for adults. They don't fall down and quit breathing die, but they die. What do you mean? I said. They substitute material things for love and hoard them. They use alcohol and drugs to numb the pain. They hide in the sterile world of the intellect. They escape by slipping into the insanity, or they strike out in rage, stealing and destroying and killing. But without physical love, they die. Spence nodded at the fat prisoner hauling his 300 pounds to the lavatory. See that poor soul? Yeah, I said, watching the huge baby-faced inmate. He thinks food is love, and he's trying to fill the emptiness in his heart and soul with mashed potatoes and gravy. Spence told me he gotten a PhD in philosophy from Northwest University, but I found it hard to believe. What would a smart guy like that be doing in here? But I had to admit that some of what he said made a lot of sense, and I figured he turned to booze when someone didn't love him, and I wondered if Steve felt so bad about his brother that he was doing the same. Sunday finally arrived. Easter, and Steve was the first waiting to see me. I got so choked up when I saw him I couldn't talk for almost a minute, and right then I felt so close to him I knew we'd be friends for the rest of our lives. We sat facing each other on the wooden benches in the grumpy visitors' room, knee to knee. "How are you doing?" Steve said, forcing a smile over the lousy circumstances. "I'm a learning how to clean toilets. Looks like you're in one." Then we just sat there like we were afraid to talk about it, but Steve had more guts than I did. "Did you really do it?" he said. "Yeah." "I don't believe it. I just don't believe it." He shook his head. "What in the heck for?" Geez, it was hard to come up with a reason that made sense. "I don't know. To sell," I said. "You're lying, you stupid peckerhead. You'd never do that." I could see the anger and disappointment in Steve's eyes, and I wanted to tell him the truth. "Is that why you wanted to hotwire a car?" "No, that was just to use Finley's truck a few times." With things on our sour note, Steve handed me a letter from Lola, and I looked at it for a second and shoved it in my pocket until I could read it alone. "Cripes, we've got to break you out of here," he said, and he smiled like old times. "Central's not the same without you. We had DB going crazy on Thursday. Bellows nailed Jerry's butt with a poem, and Sandy's in Crashbox 7th period for a month." He sprayed with the depressing room with laughter, and I don't know why, but it really made me feel good. It really did, but it seemed like Steve was there about 2 minutes and his time was up. Only 21 days to go, I said. Thanks for coming. I always wanted to know a convict I could visit in jail. We stood and almost bumped heads, and without thinking, I hugged him. He hesitated at first, and then he bear hugged me back. I don't know where the words came from, but I heard them falling out of my mouth. I'm glad you didn't jump off the Ford Bridge. So am I, he said, and he punched me on the shoulder. Lola's note said that she was really sorry, but her mother had forbid her to see me anymore. She was sorry. Geez, I tore up the note and flushed it down one of my polished toilets so none of the jailers or outlaws would read it and make fun of me. It was almost funny. A Dear John letter into the John, and I could see Lola's mother running a victory lap up her mast. At least someone was happy the way things turned out. They called me to the visitor's room again, just before visiting hours were over. My mother had come alone, in better control of herself. She began with a small talk about food and toothpaste and how the screens needed to be put up. Then she told me I'd been expelled, that I couldn't graduate with the class, and with several arrow shafts still dripping blood from my chest, I wondered how many more were in the air. Why did you do it, Kelvin? I didn't. I mean, not really. Oh, I can't explain it. The question hung in the room unanswered, like in Bellows' class, and I wished one of the inmates or visitors would raise their hand and come up with an answer. I can't understand it, Kelvin. You've always been such a good boy. My mother was really confused, and she tried to understand what only I could explain. Geez, I wanted to tell her about Rat Trap, but I couldn't give up on Gretchen. I told Pastor Ostrom. He said he'd come to see you. Holy smoke, the whole world would know. I wondered what Mr. Finley would think and my friends and teachers. My mother got up to leave. Say hello to Dad for me, I said. You'll never know how bad you've hurt him, she said with a different worry in her voice. Awful bad. She faked a hug and then limped over to the big iron door and disappeared.